The number one reason to be in favor of an import tariff, if you're a conservative in particular, or libertarian. The number one reason, you ready for this? It's going to blow your mind. To stop the expansion of the government. To stop the expansion of the government. Let me read to you from this book right here, my man, Charles Hoffman, The Depression of the 90s. This is the 1890s. He had written this in 1970. Talk about the greatest depression of the 1890s, which is horrific. All right. So we're going to go back in time. That's 135 years ago. And that's what, 8 generations or something like that? No, 7, 6, 5 generations, something like that? Yeah. And what happened was we had Benjamin Harrison sign the McKinley Tariff Act of 1890. A huge increase in tariffs. Huge, like never been seen before. It's fantastic. And what happened was in 1890s, but even before that, is we had a massive, massive beginning of a global depression. The McKinley Tariff Act had nothing to do with it, but we had a beginning of a global depression well before the 1890 McKinley Tariff Act. And we certainly didn't see this mass run of inflation. It just didn't happen in the McKinley Tariff Act. It just didn't. But anyway, so we had this big time. Essentially what's going on is the countries that we traded with were essentially, they wanted their gold reserves back. All right, they were having issues in England. I think the Barings Brothers Bank or something like that one could put, and I was like, oof. So a lot of industries were having, in fact, I think I read 25% of railroads in the United States were in receivership, basically bankruptcy. 25%, crazy. Anyway, so a lot of firms, a lot of countries wanted their gold. They said, give me your gold. And how did they get their gold? Well, they gave us our dollars. They said, we're going to give you your dollars because their dollars were guaranteed by gold. And instead, we're going to take the gold out. So what we had was we had all these dollars just being essentially consolidated in the bank reserves. But the dollars couldn't be then lent out again because they're based on the gold, and our gold reserves were dwindling like we had never seen before. So we're sending all of our gold away, taking back our dollars, and there's a contraction of the monetary supply, which again reinforced the depression that was already happening. Again, nothing to do with the tariffs. So anyway, McKinley, they signed the tariff, not McKinley, but Harrison signed the McKinley Tariff Act of 1890, right? Because tariffs were how we funded the government. And again, there was no inflation after that. It just didn't happen. In fact, I don't want to get into it, but they got rid of the tariffs on sugar. And you thought, hey, got rid of the tariffs on sugar. That had no effect at all in terms of prices, whatnot. Just a tiny little bit, but not much. Anyway, so what happened was, because the outflow of gold and the inflow of cash that was just sitting there, was just idle, we had the price of the dollar was going up, 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 which was creating a deflationary environment. Deflationary means that the dollar is higher in value than what it was previously, which means the price of the products are lower in value. So if before it took an hour to make a pen, right, to buy a pen, now it takes an hour and 20 minutes to make the pen in terms of the dollars amount that you get. Because each dollar is worth more, inherently this is worth less. And that's the difference with deflation. It destroys their producers. Destroys producers, farming in particular, in this case, agricultural, mining, things of that nature. They're just being paid less for more labor. It's just all there is to it. Deflation is bad. And people say the gold standards will rectify that. We were on the gold standard. It did the exact opposite. In fact, it helped as a stimulus for deflation to continue on, because more and more people say, yikes, there's run on the banks. We want our gold. We don't want your cash. We want our gold. And the cash became less and less available, more scarce. And as such, it became more expensive. All right. So anyway, let's go on this. Which meant we had what? Deficits. We had massive deficits back then. So this is a Grover Cleveland second term. He was elected in 1892, and this is in 1893, to deal with the mounting deficits that the United States had. All right. Faced with mounting deficits, the Cleveland administration pointed to the McKinley Tariff of 1890, which raised rates protectively and thus reduced revenue. Wait. Raised tariffs protectively and reduced revenue. That doesn't make any sense. If you're raising taxes, doesn't that increase the revenue? Interesting. One historian argues rather convincingly that the main factor in the federal deficit was the Depression, which induced a decline in imports and consequently lower revenue. So we got the Cleveland administration saying the McKinley tariff raised tariffs, which reduced revenue. And this guy was saying, no, it wasn't the raising of tariffs that reduced revenue. It was the Depression, which was induced a decline in imports. But either way, you hear something. The imports were dropping off, regardless if it's the Depression or the tariff. The imports were dropping off, which meant the government revenue was dropping off. And why would import tariffs lead to a government revenue decline? Oh, because domestic manufacturing is picking up. Domestic manufacturing isn't subject to import tariffs. Import tariffs are the tax that we pay to keep the government running and to expand the government. If we have less imports because we're producing it at home, we have less government revenue. Less government revenue means less government expansion, which means less government meddling. That's how it works. In fact, we go back to the McKinley tariff of 1890. When, again, they got rid of the price of the tariff on sugar. When the McKinley tariff took effect in October 1890, it eliminated duties on raw sugar imports and offered a 2-cent per pound subsidy on domestic producers. So that's a significant, that's like a 25 to 35% subsidy on per pound of domestic subsidies. So they got rid of raw sugar import tariffs, right? But they also subsidized raw sugar producers. This shifted the supply, the production. Wholesale prices for raw sugar dipped slightly. Again, raw sugar is what we got rid of the import tariff on. Sometimes falling around 3 to 4 cents per pound, so it did drop a little bit. But however, refined sugar, at retail, which is what consumer buys, didn't see a proportional drop. Consumer prices generally stayed in the 5 to 7 cents per pound range in the early 1890s. Why? Refiners and distributors maintained their margins, and the subsidy encouraged domestic production rather than flooding the market with cheap foreign sugar. So as such, because we encourage more domestic production, we discourage more imports. Discouraging more imports meant less imports had to pay less tariffs because of import tariffs, which meant the government was being starved of revenue, which we can see right here. The administration faced with a mounting deficit. Point to the effects of the McKinley tariff. McKinley tariff did what? It reduced the imports because it said it's a tax. You want less of something, you tax it. You want more of something, you subsidize it. As we see right here, we subsidize the domestic production of raw sugar. We got more of it. We taxed the import of raw sugar. We got less of it. Less of, in this case, meant less government revenue, less government expansion, less government meddling. End of story. That's the number one reason you want to have tariffs, to reduce the size and scope of the federal government. I rest my case. God bless. Love your thoughts. Smash that like button. We'll see you.